gospel. Now, the problem is not only that that Islam doesn't accept the Gospels and the New Testament that we have. The idea is also not only that there was a book called the Gospel and that it was lost or corrupted, but also that basically the immediate followers of Jesus, that the early Christians were basically Muslims, meaning they didn't hold any of these heretical Christian ideas, and they were completely in alignment with the Islamic religion and the Islamic way of thinking, of simply regarding him as a prophet and worshiping Allah or God alone, and so on. What could you say about that?
So I would say that there are some elements of truth in that historically, and some things I think I would consider to be problems. But on the basic level, the idea that the earliest followers of Jesus thought that he was a human and that he worshipped only one God, and they also worshipped only one God, I would say that that's true. That is true. I think that these earliest Christians, though, right after his death, believed that God had raised him from the dead and taken him up to heaven. And in the ancient views, whether it's Greek or Roman or Christian or Jewish, these ancient views, if somebody's taken up to heaven, they're living with God. They are made immortal, so they don't die again, unlike everyone else who dies again. An immortal is just another name for gods in ancient Greek. Jesus was made immortal, and I think that according to his followers, and so they started worshiping him. They didn't worship him as the one only God, but he was a being who deserved worship, and so they considered him to be the Lord whom they worshipped. And I think that happened early on, but they understood that during his life he was a human.
Mm-hmm. Now, notice what Ehrman is saying here. He's saying that Jesus was worshipped, but he wasn't worshipped as equal to God. He was not worshipped, like as the same as God. He wasn't worshipped as equal to God, the Father, God, the supreme God. And this is, if you read Bart Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God, he provides the evidence for that in a few of his chapters of his book, How Jesus Became God. And this is further illustrated in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, where God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ are separate in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6. The Greek word kurios, used in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, is different from theos, which means God, in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6. So there's a separation between God and Lord Jesus Christ. That means that Jesus Christ is not equal to God, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 6, etc. But my point is that Ehrman is right on that point, that when the Christians were worshiping Jesus, they weren't worshiping Jesus as equal to God or as the same as God. He was a subordinate of God. He was under God's authority, or he was under God's power. He wasn't equal to God. He was a subordinate of God or an agent of God. So when the Christians were worshiping Jesus, that doesn't mean they were worshiping him like he was like equal to God. They were worshiping him as a subordinate or an agent of God. And we read this in the Old Testament. If you read the book of Daniel, etc., the king Nazarbacher actually worshiped Daniel, according to Daniel chapter 2, verse 7, I believe. So when people worship other people in the Bible, it just means they're worshiping them as a sign of respect and not as a sign that they are equal to God or God themselves, etc. We also see that Moses was considered to be a god in Exodus chapter 7, verse 1. If you read Exodus chapter 7, verse 1, it says Moses is as a god. So if Moses is as a god, then then he was seen not as equal to God, but as a representative of God, according to the Old Testament. Same thing with Jesus. Jesus was seen as a representative of God or a subordinate of God, not equal to God. So when the disciples are worshiping Jesus, they're showing respect to him as an agent or a subordinate of God, not equal to God. So I think that's what Dr. Ehrman is trying to say in this interview clip and in his book, How Jesus Became God. So I would just recommend we read what Ehrman says in other places. So get that book, How Jesus Became God, and Ehrman provides the evidence for that claim. So hopefully this clarifies the point, or clarifies the misconception or the allegation that I'm taking Ehrman's words out of context. I'm not. You're hearing what Dr. Ehrman is saying about how Jesus became God. And the disciples believed he was a human at first. And then after, the crucifixion, they were seeing him as the Lord, but Lord and God are separate according to the New Testament. And as Ehrman says, that they weren't worshiping him as equal to God, just as a subordinate of God. Ehrman's words, not mine. See, again, read his book, How Jesus Became God, and listen to what Ehrman was saying in this clip. So hopefully this clarifies the point.